Welcome to The Explainer. Now, when we think about war, we usually picture the battlefield, right? Well, today we're going to flip that lens around. We're going to focus on the newsroom and take a hard look at the powerful and really controversial role the media played in shaping how the American public saw the Vietnam War. For decades, this has been the question, the one that just won't go away. This idea that journalists, with their cameras and their newspapers, were somehow the deciding factor in America's withdrawal. That idea has pretty much framed the entire debate ever since. Okay, so what's so fascinating here is you've got two completely opposite takes on the same story. On one side, you have the conventional wisdom. The press was hostile, it showed the true horrors of war, and that turned everybody against it. But the source material we're digging into today argues the exact opposite, that the media was actually a critical piece of the state's propaganda machine. So let's kick things off with that story we've all probably heard, the narrative that's really shaped the conversation for, over 50 years now? This idea, and it's a really powerful one from a journalist named Robert Elegant, well, it pretty much became the standard story. It paints this picture of the media as this powerful, independent, and ultimately hostile force that basically cost America the war. So the folks who pushed this idea argued that journalists had this adversary culture and were just relentlessly hostile to the government. They claimed all this negativity wasn't just undermining the war effort, but that it was an excess of democracy that was weakening the country. The bottom line for them was that the press had way too much power and needed to be reined in. All right, so now we're going to get into the other side of this. Because the source material we're looking at today just completely challenges that whole idea with something it calls the propaganda model. Yeah, this model completely flips that script. It suggests the media wasn't an enemy at all. In fact, it was a crucial partner in the war effort. It argues that news outlets basically operate inside a system that just takes it for granted that the government's intentions are good, which limits any real debate to things like tactics and cost, not the fundamental right or wrong of the war itself. And wow, this slide is a perfect illustration of what that model claims. Just look at the words being used. When the US does it, it's an intervention or a defense. When the Soviets do something similar, it's an invasion. The US-backed forces are defending freedom, but the other side's fighters are just Viet Cong. The source basically says, hey, this is no accident. This is the propaganda model in action, shaping how you see reality. So here's a really key point. Even when you saw these massive, heated arguments about the war in the media, they were all happening inside this very narrow box. What looked like a huge national debate was actually a lot more limited than it seemed. The analysis points out that everyone, from the hawks who were all in on the war to the doves who were against it, they all started from the exact same assumptions. They all agreed that the U.S. was there for noble reasons, to defend South Vietnam. The argument wasn't about if the U.S. should be there, but just about whether the war was winnable and how much it was costing. The fundamental right and wrong was never really up for debate. And this quote right here, from a big-name media dove at the time, Anthony Lewis, it's the perfect example of this. See, he calls the war a disastrous mistake, but he says it started with blundering efforts to do good. So even the criticism accepted the idea that the intentions were noble. It was a critique of competence, not of the mission itself. Okay, so theory is one thing. Let's see how this model actually plays out when we look at two of the most decisive moments of the entire war. First up, the Gulf of Tonkin incident back in '64. Now, the source lays out a timeline that's pretty different from the official story we all heard. It shows U.S.-backed covert raids happening just before the incident, and here's the kicker. On the night of the supposed second attack, the commander of the U.S. ship right there on the scene radioed back saying the reports were, and I'm quoting, very doubtful. But what did the media do? According to this analysis, they pretty much ran with the administration's story as if it were 100% fact. They broadcast President Johnson's line about open aggression on the high seas, and they dismissed what turned out to be accurate denials from North Vietnam as just allegations. This coverage gave the White House the public support it needed for the Tonkin Gulf resolution, the blank check that blew the doors wide open for a massive escalation of the war. All right, now let's jump to 1968 and the Tet Offensive. This is the big one, right? The main piece of evidence for that adversarial media idea. And this quote perfectly captures that argument, that the media got it completely wrong, that their pessimistic reporting was a total distortion of what was really happening. But the source material here asks a really simple but brilliant question. Okay, if the media was being way too pessimistic, what was the mood inside the government? What did they think was happening? And it turns out, inside the White House, things were bleak. I mean, really bleak. An air of gloom, comparisons to military disasters, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff reporting that the enemy controlled the countryside, and a group of elite outside advisors, the wise men, they told the president the war was unwinnable. So what the source is pointing out here is that behind closed doors, Washington was just as pessimistic, maybe even more so, than anything the media was reporting in public. And get this, even the reporting that showed the absolute horror of the war, it still operated from this default position that the U.S. was there to protect people. And that's captured perfectly in one of the most famous or infamous quotes of the entire war. So the press reports this quote, this justification for literally wiping a city of 140,000 people off the map. But according to the source, the really important thing isn't just the crazy quote itself. It's that the media presented this logic without ever asking the bigger question. Did the U.S. have the right to save that town by destroying it in the first place? So, after all this, where do we land? This analysis really pushes us to rethink the whole job of the media. Were they a watchdog or something else entirely? At the end of the day, the argument here isn't that the media lost the war because they were too critical. It's the opposite. The argument is that the media enabled the war because they were so locked into the state's patriotic viewpoint that nobody could even see it. In this view, the media created the very consensus that made the war possible. So let's just boil it down one more time. You've got these two totally conflicting narratives. The conventional wisdom says the media was too negative and undermined a noble cause. But this critical re-examination, it says the media was actually too tame, that it legitimized an aggressive war by never really questioning the government's story. And this whole analysis, even though it's about a war that ended decades ago, it leaves us with a really powerful question for right now, for today. It forces us to look past the surface-level arguments we see in the news and ask a deeper question. What are the things they aren't arguing about? What are those hidden assumptions that frame the entire debate? And more importantly, how do they shape how we see the world?